But number two, if she's in a situation where she has begun to try to get help and no help is being given on any front from the police or from the courts, then at this point, she has to try to figure out how to live with him. And that's what she's doing. She's Googling, how do I get along with an abuser? And so for her to not want to create confrontation to his face, I don't see that she has any other option. So let's keep going. And were there any discussions between the two of you about the order that these things should be placed in the back of the truck? Yes, we had discussed that my things would be going in last, right at the front, so that they would be easy to get out first. At one point, he had me help him load one of the larger pieces into the back of the U-Haul truck. And when I was up in the truck with him, I realized that everything had been all like mixed together and it was no longer separated. And I pointed out to him and he got really offended and upset. And he said, it shouldn't be your stuff, your house, my house. Okay, so this is the point. This is going right into the incident. We're right there. This is the day and the time of the shooting. So this is leading us right into that. This is the point where the prosecutor is blaming the victim for her handling of this situation and not being more forceful. But the problem here is that she doesn't have any force to give. She's in a very, very bad situation. At this point, they're loading stuff into the truck. This whole statement is truthful. I did mark said here. Said it's usually an indicator of conflict. When he says he got really offended and upset, this verbiage matches what she's telling you. I was up in the truck with him. With is a indicator of distance. So she doesn't say we were up in the truck. She says I was up in the truck with him. That for her, because she still says we, she still considers them to be married at this point, and she will still continue to use we. But when she gets close to him, you're seeing a change in language. It used to be, even when she was being abused by him, those we's would come very close to, I mean, even when they were arguing, it was we until he got violent. And now you're seeing a separation a little ahead of time here. So she is already in her mind actively trying to get out of this situation. Was there a particular demand he made at that time? He said, I needed to start acting like a wife. So this isn't started, this is start. At that point, how you chose to deal with him. I tried to change the subject. I could see how upset he was getting. So I wanted to kind of alleviate that. Direct, yeah, which means she's becoming emotional at this point. And how was Doug reacting to your efforts to do that? He was getting more upset and aggressive and threatening. Again, this is direct. There is nothing deceptive about this statement here. Do you attempt to avoid confrontation with him? Yes. What do you do? Again, she's still not over-explaining. She is being incredibly truthful. She's just answering the questions exactly like they're being asked. What do you do? I was trying to get him to leave. Okay, we see leave, conflict. I was trying to get him to leave. That language fits. I kept suggesting that maybe we should be done. Noticing I was tired, we should just wrap it up for the day. Should just means that she is reiterating what she was telling him. What this tells you is that when she's replaying in her mind how she was trying to control him, she was trying to prevent him from going off. And she did that by putting on an act of closeness. She's trying to pretend to be happy and trying not to set him off. So as she relives the act, we should try to wrap it up for the day. We should be done. This is her own reenactment in her mind of what she was saying that day. And we see we here as she was overemphasizing how close they were. She was really trying to keep him from going off. He heard me, but he completely disregarded what I was saying. Ashley, would you tell us if there came a time shortly thereafter when there was physical contact between the two of you? Yes, tell us about it. We were in the living room, and as he came up to me, instead of walking past me, he walked like right into me. Like a body check. He like thumped me. So it starts again. We have this, we were in the living room. So unless there's direct conflict, we're still seeing the we. Then as soon as we have violence, the we separates. What that tells you is that the violence is not deceptive. This did happen and it happened the way she said. Her subconscious has separated the general we of them being married into this becomes an act of violence that separates them in her mind. And it's done subconsciously. It's his shoulder to your shoulder. Yes. And describe to us, if you can, the force of the bump. It caught me off guard. I almost fell. I stumbled. How
was he acting at that point?
He was clearly hostile. He was mumbling under his breath and glaring at me.
He was clearly hostile. He was mumbling under his breath and he was glaring at me. What was your concern? I could see that it was escalating. I didn't want him to blow up at me. Was there a second instance of physical contact? Yes. Tell us about that, please. We were in the garage and it was very much like the living room. I had just suggested strongly that I wanted to be done for the day. And as he came up to me, he walked right into me, again, body checked me. This reminds me of when I was in middle school. There was a kid who would do this to me in the hallway. This is juvenile and fits right with Doug's personality. Finally, was there a third instance of contact? Yes. What happened? We were in the hallway and we were coming opposite directions toward each other. And he had a box. And as he walked up to me, he looked me in the eye and he drove the corner of the box up into me. What was your response, Ashley, after being struck by the cardboard box? I apologized. This is getting painful. So if you know anything about abuse or people who have been abused, this sort of self-preservation when they're alone with an abuser is, for me, I'm very empathetic. So it's agonizing to sit here and feel myself in that position where she is alone with an abuser and there's nothing she can do but try to placate him. So she says, I apologized. And then her attorney says, why would you have apologized? And she says, because, and this is not an indicator of sensitivity because she's answering the question, why? Why? Because I could see how upset he was and I didn't want him to get more mad at me. Very direct. Where does Doug go after the incident? He continued to the garage with the box. And then in court, they go through, there's pictures taken by the police afterwards. She had a big scratch there where he hit her with the box. So there's no question that this actually did happen. Aside from her language being truthful, it did actually happen. There's evidence of it. And what happened at that point? Okay, he started. So now we have started. And if you look into this paragraph, started, this is a very rapid escalation of violence by Doug. He started getting into a back and forth about being done for the day and what still needed to be packed. And I wanted to be done. And we ended up in our daughter's bedroom. So we have two indicators of closeness here of their marriage is still intact. He is still her husband in her mind. So whatever he has done to her up to this point is not enough for her to tell him to his face that she is leaving. So she wants to leave and she has left him a letter, but she has still never told him to his face because she doesn't want to get killed. And he started screaming at me. Again, this for her is subconscious. She does not know that when her brain picks the word started, it is always directly correlated to violence. We've seen that through her entire statement here. And she's telling you what happened and it's truthful. And he started screaming at me and he said, shut the fuck up. He started calling me names and he said, I can see what you're doing. You're trying to get me to leave. He said, I don't have to leave. I can stay and spend the night if I want to because I'm your husband. Now, this is the last we that you're going to see in this statement. The we's came right up to the incident. And if you see a we in the incident, that's deception. No matter what you see in the rest of the statement, it means that in her mind, she had a choice at that point. But if you don't see, if that we disappears right here, that's a very strong indicator of truthfulness in what comes later. And I'll tell you, this is the last we in her statement. This is an indicator of truthfulness. We would not expect to see we once the final confrontation begins. At that point, Ashley, how did you feel with respect to your own personal safety? Again, she's not inserting emotion unless she's directly asked. And her attorney wants the jury to hear that she's scared because her defense rests on her fearing for her life. But when somebody tells you their emotion in their own statement, that's an indicator of deception. And because she's so truthful, there's no emotion in her statement unless she's directly asked for it. So she says, I was scared. Did you take any steps to try to avoid anything further? She says, yes, I ran to try to leave the house. She says, I ran. This is an indicator of stress. She's now feeling under stress. And you're seeing that subconsciously come out in her language. I ran to try to leave the house. And where did you run to? She says, to the front door. Did you make it? No. Tell us what happened. He stopped me. He grabbed me by the hand and yanked me back. I'm not really sure how he did it, but he spun around. So he was in front of me, between me and the door. He said, so where the fuck do you think you're going? Again, I have nothing is marked in here because everything is in the right pronouns. It's in past tense. He stopped me. He grabbed me. This is intense. And when you read this, when you're looking at this, if you don't feel that escalation, you should feel that escalation because these are truthful statements. When there's an element of you're thinking, she's a liar, this didn't really happen, then it allows you to disassociate. But for me, I can't disassociate from this because I know that this is truthful. And so the more I read here, I'm feeling what she's feeling. And before we go to the end, I want to profile her quickly here before we actually see the rest of this. Here's my profile. We're jumping onto a tangent here. Okay, if you've watched her, she cries a lot. And I'm going to be honest with you, I find it annoying. And it's because, for what I described earlier, it's either real or it's fake. And if it's fake, it's somebody being deceptive about an emotion, which to me is hugely insulting because I feel empathy very strongly. And so when somebody fakes an emotion like pain, it really upsets me. Or when somebody is in a lot of pain and I can't tell, it puts me in this limbo of, am I being deceived or am I not being deceived? So it's much easier for me to look at a written statement. Now, the problem with this is that once I understand with certainty what's going on, then it puts everything in context. And I'll make that statement make sense in just a second. Are the waterworks real or fake? So the first question you need to ask, is she a psychopath? Because her entire statement is truthful. So either she is truthful or she's a psychopath. The only way that you can fake that is by being an actual psychopath who doesn't feel emotion. If you don't feel stress and you don't feel fear, then when you talk, you sound like a truthful individual because your brain is incapable of registering the stress and fear. So we need to know, is she a psychopath? And my notes here is she loves animals. Her dog tried to protect her. We get that in her statement and we know that that's true. Doug said that. And if her dog loves her, then she's clearly showing affection to her dog. And if a person loves animals, then it's highly unlikely that they're a sociopath or a psychopath. She became emotional when her dog was hurt. She threw herself on the floor crying. Okay, so I'm going to show you a clip of the cross-examination here. There's a question from the prosecutor.
A small picture that had like deep sides and like the glass was at the front of it. And there was a sand dollar that I had painted and decorated. And I put it on like a black cardstock and I wrote a saying on it that said something about how like you can be strong through the storms and that, you know, seashells are beautiful things that come out of storms.
And what was the problem with the shadow box?
Eva had taken it apart and I guess had thrown out the thing that I made and was using the picture frame for something else.
What was she using the picture frame for?
She had put a rose from her mom's funeral in it.
And that upset you pretty badly, didn't it?
It made me really sad. I'd taken a lot of time to make it for her and I thought it was special and yeah.
You began crying.
Yes.
And you dropped to the floor and sobbed hysterically.
Probably.
You were so upset that she put her dead mother's rose in the shadow box.
Right. It wasn't that, it was that she took it apart. I mean, I would have bought her another shadow box.
Okay, so you saw that she hand painted a sand dollar and she wrote a poem in there and she put that into a shadow box for Eva. Now, Eva has her own issues. I would never blame a 15-year-old who lost her mom for the emotions that she's feeling or how she acts because of those emotions. But what it does tell you is when Ashley doesn't deny that she fell on the floor crying, it tells you that, yeah, you might be thinking, oh my God, she's a drama queen. But keep in mind that the one thing that does tell you is that she's not a psychopath. And that tells you something else too. Let's keep going. We have enough evidence here. I showed you some of her statements in the beginning. We know she's not a psychopath, which means her truthful statements are actually truthful. The next thing that we do want to ask is she acting? Is she fake crying? But that would not impact her verbiage. So if she's not a psychopath and her crying is fake, we would get a ton of deception through all of her verbiage. And we got nothing so far. Everything that she said is truthful so far. So no, it's not fake. She's not a psychopath and the crying is real. Why the extreme emotional reactions? There's no denying that her emotional reactions are abnormal. A normal person is not going to have these types of issues, not going to throw themselves on the ground crying because a 15-year-old girl breaks apart a present that you gave her. But let's look at this. Is she emotionally stuck in childhood? That's a question you want to ask because she's acting childish, right? In that cross-examination question, you get a glimpse of, okay, she's extremely emotional. She's the opposite of psychopath. She's clearly overly emotional, which would explain why she cries so much in the trial and how that could actually be truthful. But her actions are, and this is not meant to tear down Ashley or to tear down a victim here, but this is a legitimate question. And if we're going to understand truly her responses and why you get the responses that you get, you have to understand Ashley as a person. So this is a relevant question for us to be asking ourselves. Is she emotionally stuck in childhood? And let's look at the facts here. She married a man 30 years older than her. She married a man who had the same job as her father. And see below question and answer. Is she seeking to replace a father figure in her life? Ashley, describe for us the man that you thought you married. He was very loving and attentive. He was always with me. We did everything together. He laughed a lot, and he made me feel very special and loved. He was always looking for ways to be with me and to do things for me. I have a young daughter, and this is how I treat her. What she's explaining to you here is not romantic love. This is parental love, and that's what she's seeking here. So that is quite telling about how she's looking at Doug. So the conclusion, I believe she's emotionally stuck around the age of 6 to 8 years old. I'm not saying that she's cognitively stuck there. I'm saying that emotionally, she's still seeking affirmation at that level, at the level of a 6 to 8 year old. Again, I'm not a psychologist. This is only things that I learned in order, let's not go too much into me here. This is what I see here. What we learn from this is the extreme emotion is real. Now, that's scary because if you now realize that everything you're seeing is real, now you have to listen to the words and just accept it. What she's saying is truth. So the emotion that she has when she says it, along with the words themselves, are truth. So let's go back and look at the incident itself. I think this gives us some insight into who she is. And most importantly, if you're like me at this point, you're thinking, oh God, like, I don't know if I even want to know what she says about the incident because whatever it is probably going to be the direct and honest truth. So you want to see what happened? Let's look at what happened. Let's see. Okay, he stopped me. He grabbed me. That was where we left off. What was your response? And she says, I just blurted out. I said, I'm done and you need to leave now. That's the first time she's ever told him this, likely, because for her to say, I just blurted it out means that at this point she had been holding that in. So you have to understand the word, the meaning of the word blurted it out. So to her, she had never said this before, even though she had written it out for him and filed a motion that's different than actually telling him to his face. So she says, I just blurted it out. I said, I'm done and you need to leave now. This is likely the first time she's ever told him face to face that she was done. And she uses the word done. This comes just after the last we. So at this point, you can see things deteriorating quickly. What was Doug's reaction to that command? To leave now. Well, I bet he's not going to take it well. He's not that type. He said, you can't fucking leave me. That is exactly what I would expect him to say. Then what happens? He hit me on the side of the head. Tell us what that represents. Okay, it's a picture of my face. So I put this in here so that you know that this is still truthful and documented. She had swelling on the side of her face in her mugshot right after this incident happened. What was different at that moment, Ashley, than it had been any time prior in your relationship with Doug? She says, he had never actually hit me before. So she uses the word never, but she qualifies that with a time frame. The problem that you get with the word never is that it means present and future as well. And so it can never be an accurate statement unless the person says before. So she's saying that up from the moment I met him until before that incident, he had never actually hit me, is what she said. And that makes this a truthful statement. So he had never actually hit me. Never is made correct by qualifying the time frame before. Before is missing time that's glossed over the hundreds of crazy things that he did do. She says before. Before is in and of itself a term that means missing time. When she says before, she means all of the abuse that she has taken up to that point was never his fist hitting her face. So she says he had never actually hit me before. And then what did you do? I ran where? To my room. Why? And he has to ask her why. Because I was scared. Lack of her telling you the emotion is truthful. Ashley, did you have anything in your room that could protect you? She says, I had my gun. Did you grab the gun? Yes. As you're grabbing the gun, what, if anything, did you hear? I heard the door hitting the doorstop. This is just straight from her memory at this point. All of her senses are in life or death mode. And so every sound, every smell, all of your senses are now registering at 100%. As she's fumbling, trying to get the gun, she hears the door hit the doorstop. And it's crazy. I've been in a few life or death situations because of my career. And I can tell you that the weirdest things register and just are seared into your memory. So the spring that goes when the door hits the doorstop is probably something that will be traumatic for her for the rest of her life. That sound of the door hitting the doorstop, as if it was flung open. Yes. And what do you see, Ashley, when you look up? Doug was standing in the doorway. His face was red, like the veins were bulging in his neck. The way he was looking at me, he didn't even look like Doug. His eyes were black.
And what do you see, Ashley, when you look up?
Doug was standing in the doorway. His face was red. Like the veins were bulging in his neck. The way he was looking at me, it didn't even look like Doug. His eyes were black.
Does he yell anything at you?
He said, "You're fucking done."
That scared the crap out of me when I read it the first time. You can't really understand very well what she's saying because she's crying, but if you listen closely, you can hear every word. She has tunnel vision. When you get into an actual shootout or just in a life or death situation, you get tunnel vision, which means you hyperfixate on anything that could be a threat to you. He wasn't holding a gun. If he was holding a gun, then she would be describing like the words that were written on the barrel of the gun. Your attention is going to be drawn to what you find the most threatening. And for her in that moment, he was raging. She saw the bulging veins in his neck and his pupils had fully dilated to the point where all she saw was pure black eyes. And when your pupils dilate like that, that means he was in that same combat mode that she was at this point. And you get that that shot of adrenaline. The first thing that happens is your eyes dilate. And so that you can take in all of the information that you need to take in. If he had decided at that point that he was going to kill her, then his eyes would dilate like that. Okay, does he yell anything at you? He said, "You're fucking done." He used the same word that she used when she said she was leaving him. She said, "I'm done." And he says, he comes into the room and he says, "You're fucking done." The way this is presented, there's no deception here. And he's telling her words back to her. There's absolutely no reason at this point to believe that it's not coming from memory. What does he do at that point? And she says, I would expect that. That's not deceptive. That's her emotional stress level. It has gone up. Held the gun like in front of me. And I said, "Stop." And he like turned and got into this like a fighting stance. Like I got low and he started. She has this subconscious word here, started. At this point, she remembers, it's kind of comes across disjointed when you talk to somebody after a shooting. She's going to remember weird things that she's focusing on. She remembers herself lowering down, which is a protective motion. She remembers him getting into like a fighting stance. I got low and he started, which means the first thing that her mind registers is this act of violence. He started like moving his arms and his hands around in these like jerking motions. What were you expecting when you were holding the gun out in front of you and you told him to stop? She says, "I thought when he saw it, he would leave." That is a direct and truthful statement. She thought that just presenting the gun would be enough for him to say, "The hell with you," and turn and leave, and that would end it. And did he? No.
At that point, Ashley, what are you thinking?
I thought he was gonna kill me.
Tell us what happens next.
He started coming towards me, and then he lunged at me, and I started pulling the trigger, and he just kept coming, and I remember trying to move to get away from him, but he kept coming at me.
And then she says, "I thought he was going to kill me." It's said with no deceptive indicators here. Now, that is what she needs to say for the jury. So let's just scrutinize the hell out of this. Is it possible that in that moment that she wasn't thinking that and she just said this for the jury to hear? Well, everything that leads up to this, including her subconsciously telling you that he started the violence right here, that is to me an indicator that this is truthful. At this point, she thought that presenting the gun would be enough for him to leave. And he begins the violence. He begins to attack at that point. I'm not sure what else you could be thinking at that point if you were her. Tell us what happened next. He started coming towards me. So he and me are separated at far ends of the sentence here. It's exactly how it should be, if it's truthful. And then started is an indicator of violence. So he started coming towards me. This is an indicator that subconsciously she is telling you, and she has no conscious control over the words that she's telling you here. There's no way to prep and say, okay, I'm going to say he first, and then I'm going to say me at the end of the sentence. Nobody knows that except me and a few other people, and now you. He started coming towards me, and he lunged at me, and I started pulling the trigger. So she is telling you, now started pulling the trigger is an act of violence. So she is telling you that this is the chronological order. He started an act of violence before by moving his arms and hands around, getting into this fighting stance. Then she presented the gun, and then he began to advance. He started coming towards me. He lunged at me, and I started pulling the trigger. The only way that I would question the truthfulness of the chronology of this is if there was a different indicator of missing time here. But started is an indicator that violence is starting. We've seen that through her entire statement. And so this is the chronology. And that means that everything that she has said and everything that she has seen up to this point is true. There is a man who has been abusing her for a while. Now he's coming at her, and the only thing that she can see are bulging veins, his red face and black eyes. And he lunged at me, and I started pulling the trigger. He just kept coming. Now this is a huge indicator of truthfulness here, because anybody who has shot people before knows that when you shoot them, it's not like the movies. A bullet doesn't hit you like a bowling ball. It doesn't make your entire body fly backwards. And that's kind of what you think. It also doesn't instantly kill you. It's noteworthy to her that he just kept coming. As bullets were entering him, it didn't slow him down. And she's probably not used to seeing real people get shot in front of her. And so she probably thought it would be more like the movies. And when he took bullets and he didn't stop coming, that was very surprising. That was very shocking to her. And I remember trying to move to get away from him, but he kept coming at me. So she's shooting and trying to get away because she's not understanding at this point. She cannot register why she's shooting him, and it hasn't stopped attacking her, coming, forcefully at her. Ashley, would you tell us why, if you're holding a loaded firearm, you were attempting to move away? That is only something that a person who has never seen real violence before would say. Because in a life or death situation, when you're shooting somebody and they're not going down, there's only one thing that a truthful person would be doing, and that's trying to get away. And so she says, I was trying to get away from him. I was terrified. So she's trying to explain why she's trying to get away from him. And it should be very self-explanatory. And all right, so you're firing. He keeps advancing. What happens next? It was like his feet slipped out from under him and his legs went up in the air. This type of statement that seems weird to you is the only type of statement that could be true. Because if somebody starts describing a scene from a movie, that's deceptive. Oh, he had a look on his face and I could see the blood coming out from his shirt. That type of thing is something you see in a movie, and that is deceptive. In real life, you see weird things. Like in that moment, it looked like his feet slipped out from under him and his legs flew up into the air. When Doug hits the floor, what's your immediate reaction? She says, I ran for help. Again, her intention here was not to kill him, because if her intention was to kill him, then she would have said anything other than this. So the fact that she tells you, I ran to get help, means she only shot him to protect herself, to get herself out of that situation. But she still, no matter how insane this is, she didn't want him to die. And honestly, that follows with her mentality through this whole thing. She keeps getting abused and she still loves him. She still uses the word we right after he abuses her. So she's forced to shoot him And then the first thing she does is run to get him help instead of just letting the problem die on the floor. Can you tell? I'm not saying I would do that, but my statement right after that would not be I ran to get help. Can you tell us how many shots you fired? She says, I have no idea. I was in a panic. That's truthful. If anybody who tells you that they know how many rounds they fired is either a Navy SEAL or they're lying. Do you remember anything about the shooting beyond what you've told us here? And she says, it was a blur. Also truthful. Where did you run for help, Ashley? To my neighbor's house. What was your neighbor's name? John, say it. Ashley, I have to ask you a couple of very difficult questions. So we haven't hit the difficult questions yet? All right.
Ashley, I have to ask you a couple of very difficult questions. You okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Ashley, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury why you shot Doug.
I was scared to death. I thought he was gonna kill me. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped in my own house. He wouldn't let me leave.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. So she's apologizing to him now because she's having a hard time, not a hard time. She can't control her emotional state. She's reliving this. She is crying uncontrollably in a way that to a person who's skeptical, it seems like she could be faking it. She's absolutely not faking it. When you're done with this video, go look up her video and you will be absolutely horrified when you see what she's going through right there, knowing that she's telling the truth. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury why you shot Doug. And she says, I was scared to death. I thought he was going to kill me. And this is going to be hard to listen to. I had nowhere to go. I was trapped in my own house. He wouldn't let me leave. This is straight out of a horror movie. This is like Scream. This is what exactly was going through her mind at that moment. I thought he was going to kill me and I had nowhere to go. I was trapped in my own house. He wouldn't let me leave. Everything about this statement is truthful. It starts with I. There's I's throughout the statement. It's past tense. It's active voice. And she separates. There's no we. She separates him and me both times. Leave is an indicator of conflict. Everything about this statement screams truth. That means that you, as the viewer, now have to come to terms with this reality. This is how she felt. This is what actually happened. She lived through a horror movie. And it's not a movie. I mean, she lived through what we can only imagine because we see it in horror movies. She lived through it in real life. As you sit here today, Ashley, how do you feel about what happened? She says, horrible. He's the father of my child, and someday I'm going to have to explain it all to her. Now,
as you sit here today, Ashley, how do you feel about what happened?
Horrible. He's the father of my child. So I'm going to have to explain it all to her.
Now, she still isn't thinking of herself. The only thing she's thinking about, he pulls her into the present. At this point, how do you feel? And she still doesn't feel better. She doesn't feel safe now. What she says is she feels horrible. She feels that he was the father of my child, and someday I'm going to have to explain it to her, which means she's only thinking of the loss of his life and how it's going to impact her child. And now that takes us to the very last thing that I want to cover here, which is she uses the word child. When somebody uses the word child to refer to their own child and they haven't given a proper introduction, it means they are aware that that child has been abused. We talked about that in a previous video. She reports to Child Protective Services that she believes that her child is being abused, that Emerson has been abused by Doug. Now, what this tells you is that when the media presented it, they presented it as if she was lying in order to try to get custody. What this subconscious use of the word child tells you is that she did see indicators of abuse. In her mind, it's crystal clear that Emerson was abused. So her brain won't let her use a word that changes that reality. So there you go. That's not deceptive. That is raw truth. Hopefully, going through this, in all of my other videos, I'm showing you when somebody is guilty because they're lying. This video is going to force you to come to terms with honesty. Now there's a story that's truthful, and you have to go back and think, well, if I thought that she was lying before, I have to look at this again. I have to go into this with an understanding. I have to look at this with a different lens. I have to say, okay, is part of the reason why I thought she was lying before because her reality was so horrifying that I didn't want to think that that was real? Because it is the case. So here you go. That's it. That's my analysis of this. You've gotten the reason why this is my opinion, but you have the full reason why this is my opinion. And yeah, I feel strongly about this because I can feel her pain as she's going through this. The truthful language doesn't allow me to escape this, where I can disassociate when I watch a horror movie and, I know it's a movie. This, I can't disassociate from this. Like I look at this and I know that it's real. And so it causes a whole bunch of emotion. So that's it. I hope you learned something here. And I hope that you take the time to go back and watch her testimony and just look at it for what it is. It is her telling you exactly what happened that day. So that's it. As I always say, keep seeking the truth for yourself. Learn how to identify the truth when you see it. Learn how to call someone a liar when they're a liar, and learn how to give somebody the credit of being truthful when they're truthful. This is Truth Revealed signing off.